Hey guys, what's going on? Got another build for y'all this evening. We've got the Blight build. So we've been working on this for a little over a week now, getting some gear for it, getting really fine-tuning it, getting the pieces where we really feel we need to have them. And I think we're in a pretty good place. I think there's a few more changes that'll probably occur, but I think we're pretty happy with where it's at currently. So there'll be a little bit of a quick speed clear at 91 pit boss, real quick kill at the end of this video, so you can see the rotations and how it kind of plays out, and what kind of damage you can expect pretty quickly. Didn't get a good roll on the boss, so we were moving during stagger phase, but you can still see that it absolutely shreds during stagger phase. And stagger is one of the big things with the build, to keep things staggered and do that extra damage. So let's jump right into it. So one of the things with Blight this season is we got the new Ebon Piercer amulet. This amulet's fantastic. It shoots out your regular Blight bolt, but it also sends out projectiles on its way. Those projectiles do a ton of damage, and we're taking advantage of that by stacking our dots and our damage and our int real high. While we also stack int, we're also getting some wither procs with that. So one thing that really changed with the itemization this season that's really impactful is we don't have to really worry about what stats are where. In terms of like, are we trying to balance one or the other? It's really straightforward with dots. You're looking for dots, int, damage, and it's pretty simple. And you can really dot stack, which is what's really driving a lot of this damage up when we get those wither procs. So for the gear itself, these two I'm still interchangeable, I feel like, between this and Tyrael, because you can kind of get the same stats on these two. You can get your essence regen, and we're going to talk a little about what the stats are so impactful to the build. But I'm going to be crafting a Tyrael's this evening and get some tests in with that. I'm very curious about that because you can raise your defenses. Actually, Tyrael's one of the most defensive pieces of gear we can get. So I will have an update on that once I craft that this evening. So right now, I'm using the Shaco. On the chest plate, we've got Hardened Bones with Int, Max Life, and Essence per second. We've got Gloves of the Damned. All of our damage is shadow damage, so this is huge. It's a huge multiplier for us. One thing to note, you want your attack speed for this build as high as possible. You got Int, attack speed, and damage over time here. For the legs, we've got Shielding Storm. This is just to give us a little bit of stability when we're tanking these mobs, because when you get to higher tiers, it is a lot of damage. So having that Shielding Storm up does save you some from tanking the mobs. Not so much the bosses, but the whole goal again for the bosses is just to stagger them and deal out your massive amounts of dots on those stagger windows. For the boots, we've got Concussive Strikes. This one's huge because when there's dazed, you're doing an extra bit of damage, and you want essence per second here with intelligence and movement speed. On the weapon, we get to double dip in this with the dots and damage. So you want intelligence, damage over time, and damage. Preferably you can get your damage also GA, but I didn't get that lucky, but it's good. And you're going to use Blighted on this. It's the biggest modifier we've got, is a 240%. Ebon Piercer's the amulet. The biggest thing you need to know about this is you want your damage stat to be your highest value for this one, as high as you can get it. The other stats are great. Movement speed, of course, is great. Shadow damage, it's one of our additives, it's great. Any damage reduction is fantastic. And of course, we do want the essence cost, and we'll talk about how that plays out here in just a second. For your rings, there's some things you can do with your rings. So right now I'm using Retribution and Inner Calm. For pushing, or if you're just trying to speed farm and you don't want to have to worry about did you die while you're speed farming, you can throw in Ultimate Shadow. It gives a little bit more dots, as well as it's going to keep that barrier up more. You can also slot in here for your boots. You could actually use Void as well as part of the, if you're speed farming, it helps pull all the mobs in a little more, and it just helps group them while you're trying to speed farm those. This way that I've got it set up right now is primarily for massive damage. We can get tankier. There's other ways that we can build out a little tankier, a little more HP instead of the damage on the weapon. So there are other ways to get tanky, but this build I'm building out really just to dish the max amount of damage possible. Currently, right now, my big hit is 756 million dot ticks, so essentially 1.5 billion DPS. Once we get to 1212, that'll definitely spike up to around 1 billion dot ticks as we get a little bit more of our next wither breakpoint, and we get a little bit more attack speed and just damage overall. We'll see that 1 billion dot tick pretty easily. For the Paragon, been working on this. I'm still. There may be some changes. Again, this is some areas of which you can change some of your defensive using Undaunted, which I think is a very underrated glyph. It's a good damage reduction, and again, trying to balance out the damage with the damage reduction. So I think the Undaunted's a good one, but you could put Exploit in here for a little bit more, or not Exploit. You could put in another, Exploit in this one. Yeah, you can drop in Exploit here for Undaunted and get a little bit more damage, but just trying to balance that as we're pushing into the 110. We're at 107 now, a little bit more masterwork, and we'll start pushing into the 110s. So your first board with Gravekeeper, second board is Wither, and then I've got Amplify in there. Third board is Scent of Death, and I've got Sacrificial in it. And then we've got the Bone Graft with Abyssal, Bloodbath with Control, Flesh Eater with Scourge, and then Hulking Monstrosity with Undaunted. Skill tree is pretty simple. One thing to note, I do have 5 points into Blight, but the procs from your Ebon Piercer or the projectiles do not scale with skill damage. They don't scale with extra points. So while we are speccing 5 into it, there's really no better places for that other than getting extra damage on our main projectile. 2 into Reap, or 1 into Reap and 1 into Enhance just to get to the next tier. Unlimited Energy to get to the Imperfectly Balanced for the extra damage on our core, and then getting the extra modifier over on Supernatural Blight. 1 into Hued Flesh. This build does a lot of corpse generation with those projectiles, so 1 is plenty to maintain that corpse generation. 1 into Blood Mist, specking into Ghastly Blood Mist so that we can keep corpse going as we start a fight is a very big piece to that. Especially for boss fights, you can jump right on in with Blood Mist to get a corpse up and start your tendrils to start getting your stagger going. 1 into Corpse Explosion all the way down to Blighted Corpse Explosion. This is just going to do a couple things for you. It's going to keep your Fueled by Death going, which is our next passive. It's going to keep your Fueled by Death going. It's going to give you the extra Shadow Blight procs as the BCE is going off, and it also keeps you a good uptime for your Flesh Eater, or being able to maintain corpse management when you're ready to pop a Flesh Eater for when you're in your boss's stagger phase. Moving on down, we've got Death's Embrace, just extra damage and some damage reduction, movement speed, 3 into Amp Damage, 1 into Decrepify, and then all the way down to Abhorrent. This gives you some CDR on your Corpse Tendrils and your Bone Storm. Got 1 into Tendrils going over to Plagued for the Vuln and the pulls, of course. Got 2 into Necrotic Carapace, just giving that extra Fortify. 1 into Reaper's Pursuit. We got a great move speed on this build already, so I just put 1 in here just to get us to open up to the other ones. 3 into Gloom, 3 into Terror, 1 into Crippling Darkness, just having that extra ability to stagger. 3 into Standalone, 3 into Memento, 1 into Bone Storm, only going to Prime Bone Storm because we do not need the extra crit chance. Lastly, finishing off with Shadow Blight. So now that you've seen the Paragon of skills, talk about how some of this works together. So right now, with the max essence per second here and the max essence per second here, coupled with the resource generation on the Shaco, as well as the resource generation from the Tempers on the 2 rings, I currently am sitting at a very respectable 29% essence regen per second. And then when you look at the essence cost reduction from Ebon Piercer, my Blight is actually costing 19. So there's about a 10% or a 10 net on the single cast. Now, It does not mean we can infinitely spam. The more, however, these get upgraded, and if you did hit some crits on them, or if you had your masterwork and crit on your essence per second, you would get to a point of which those would balance out. But as you see here, even with the attack speed that I've got, I can spam it for quite a while. So the other thing you want to look at is your attack speed. So currently with the setup I've got, I'm sitting at 80.8% attack speed. This can go a little higher, but right now I'm attacking 1.6 attacks per second. So it's very important because the more we're attacking, the more that we can stack those shadow damages, and that's where you start to see those big numbers when you've got multiple stacks of shadow going, you've got fueled by death going, you've got flesh eater going, and then when your shadow blight goes off and your blighted aspect enables, then you have on top of that the wither proc. So when all of those really synergize together, that's when you're going to start to see those 700, 800 to a billion dot ticks. And it's very important to manage that damage output as well, to keep the boss's damage, or keep your damage on the boss during those windows. Especially when you get to higher tiers, you can't face tank the boss's mechanic anymore. So you want to make sure that those stagger windows, you've got your corpses primed at 4, so that as soon as you get it staggered, you can jump in and get your full damage stacks going with Fueled by Death and Flesh Eater. So a couple other things to note here. I have stagger, a lot of stagger in the build. There is still room for some more, but right now I've got chance to freeze on the gloves. There is a lot of talk about stun maybe doing more. I haven't actually tested that. I just know that Operator Otter was talking about it earlier, that the more stun you've got, it's staggering quicker. But again, any type of stagger effect that you've got is allowing you to quickly get into that burn phase. Other than that, the build's pretty straightforward. You want to stack that int, damage over time, and dots, and keep especially when you're mobbing, make sure you're keeping those tendrils on to keep all of the mobs together. Considering that this is a glass cannon in this setup, and any types of mobs that have that elemental stuff can really shred you pretty quick. So take all that into account when you're really pushing forward through your zones. Well, that's pretty much the build. I'll have some updates coming out the next week or two as we push more, as we get better stats and stuff. But for now, you guys know where I'm at. If you've got any questions, comments, if you see some improvements you want to make on the build, let me know. This is a work in progress as well as everybody's, because we're still pushing. So thanks for watching, and you have a good night.